everything. And I guess the good thing, David, just go ahead, say hello to everybody, and then we can kind of walk right into the history of Medicaid, which you've done a little more research than I have. So I'll let you go ahead and take that part. So go ahead, take it away, David.
Well, hello from Raleigh, North Carolina, where the pollen count here is getting higher and higher. So you'll have to excuse me occasionally rubbing my eyes because it's affecting me that way. But glad to be here with you and talk about exactly that. What everyone hears about Medicaid: don't do this, don't do that, you'll lose everything. Here's the solution. What we're going to try to do here today is talk about what I'll call the nuts and bolts, the traps you need to avoid. But in fact, Medicaid, from the beginning, thank you, Lyndon Johnson, was developed to have what he called, when he gave the speech, when he introduced it, his promise to America, which was that people would no longer, the elderly would no longer, or families would no longer live in the fear of having a lifetime of work poured into a nursing home or to the cost of paying care, but to help the government really to provide a long-term care solution to paying for care. And the intent, quite frankly, in that initial legislation was to allow families to preserve the vast majority of their assets and still be able to enjoy good quality care really paid for by your taxes. In fact, I would say that Medicaid is probably one of the best long-term care policies, insurance policies, that you have, that you pay for or already have paid for with hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes that you paid over your lifetime, you and or your family. Unfortunately, the government spent that money on other things, much like we rated Social Security itself, and they've made it extremely difficult by various revisions and updates to the law. They've obscured it so that people now think, oh, Medicaid's only for the poor or the destitute or where you go to get lousy care. No, no, no. Medicaid is actually an excellent solution, but the rules are complex, as Jeff just mentioned, and there's potholes or dangers that you have to face to get at it. We're going to talk about some of those major elements to pay attention to, what can be done, what shouldn't be done, and how Medicaid and all those taxes you paid can help preserve a lifetime of work.
And I think that's a really important point to also get across, because there are a lot of people, it's not just, oh, well, this is where broke people go and get inferior quality care. There are a lot of people out there who kind of get angry that, oh, you're cheating the government. No, look, the government sets up the different rules. You've paid for this through your tax dollars throughout your working lifetime, and it needs to be there for your care when the time comes. It's crazy to just say, oh, well, you're cheating the government. No, they set up the rules. And I always compare this. Look, would you go to somebody, let's just picture we've got two people working in the same exact job, getting the exact same amount of money, they have the same exact house, the same exact expenses, but one year, one guy goes and gets one of these computer programs and fills out his taxes, and it's okay, you owe the government this much money. You owe $1,000, and okay, fine, they grumble, they write out the check. The guy next door takes $500 or $750, pays an account, the accountant goes through everything, and they go, okay, well, look, here's this deduction, and here's that deduction. You're getting a check back for $2,000. Nobody screams that your accountant is helping you cheat the government. It's the same thing. If you know the rules, then you can win the game. And that's just the way life is. And that's just the way the program is. But you are also very correct that the government makes it a lot more complicated. And just explaining it in as basic terms as I can think of, I am the plain English attorney. I try not to get bogged down too much in the rules when I'm explaining things. Look, this program is here. They're never going to say, seniors, We don't care. We'll roll you out onto the street to die because you can't afford long-term care. The government isn't going to do that. But what they will do is make the rules a lot more complex so that you're forced to spend every penny because you and the family, you're throwing up your hands and just saying, oh, this is too complicated. I'm just going to have to spend all of my money. That's not the way the program was designed initially. It wasn't the intention behind it. But a lot of people just go ahead and they spend all that money rather than working with certified Medicaid planners and other professionals to know what those loopholes are so that they can preserve as much as the rules allow you to. Just like the neighbor who goes to the accountant, they're not cheating anyone. So I think that's also a very important point with this whole program. So the other thing that I often end up talking about is how Medicaid planning kind of compares to estate planning. And Medicaid planning is a lot more complicated and complex just because the rules are out there. And there's a whole bunch of them. What would you say? There's like a couple of 100,000 different rules. And there are some main ones we work with, but there's this whole body of code. And it doesn't help that Medicaid, as a program for long-term care, it's not just a federal government program. It's not just a state government program. It's a hybrid collaboration between federal and state governments where the federal government has a set of rules but leaves in states, here's the parameters and things that you can look and go through. But you have to at least do this and at least do that. And all 50, well, not all 50 states, 49 states have their state rules. California has Medi-Cal. They said, federal government, we don't want to do this. We're going to do this on their own. Well, okay. It's still kind of the same types of concepts. It's complicated, but it is something that you can navigate. So any comment on that before I go into a story of how that not all professionals are created equal? You got anything you want to put in?
Well, regarding the rules of the game, yeah, I think it's a federal program, but each state administers it differently. And what we found is that within each state, each county actually can have different decisions about what goes on. Well, what are the rules? Well, as you pointed out, Jeff, in other presentations, there is no book that you can pull off of your shelf. The rules are online in the state, and they're, I don't know, if you did print them out, Jeff, what, a couple of thousand pages? If you could, yeah, thick. If you could, yeah, and then they're updated, right? So now you've got the rules, they're online, hard to navigate. They're written for attorneys, quite frankly, and now they change, and you don't know what change was made. But you know, you better keep up, because one little change, I think, in some of the examples you'll give, can destroy a well-built program. So, yeah, I think that is best explained by giving a couple of examples that I think you're going to go into.
Well, yeah, when we're talking about professionals, there are a lot of attorneys out there when it comes to estate planning, and I've said this in estate planning videos. Okay, they'll do a quote estate planning as a side gig. They've got a big family law practice. They do a lot of divorces and adoptions and other family law stuff. And well, yeah, I suppose I could do a will or do a trust, or they got a lot of personal injury experience, and that's the main part of their practice. But then, yeah, I could do a trust, and you know, I've got some templates and whatnot. But the minute you go to them and say, well, okay, how do we plan for Medicaid? A lot of attorneys will just go, oh, no. This isn't something that I'm comfortable in. I'm going to send you somewhere else. Even attorneys that do a lot of, quote, estate work, not just on the planning end like I do, but they do probate and estate administration, and they're all staffed up and they're familiar with all of those probate court rules. They're also going to say, no. I don't necessarily want to get the background and understand everything to do things like a certified Medicaid planner or an attorney that focuses on the rules in this particular area. But the story I'm going to tell, it kind of was heartbreaking that she got pulled in, and I don't want to say deceived, because they were just financial institutions trying to keep money with their group, but they didn't realize just how badly they messed her and the family over. So this is kind of Medicaid planning, but it was also a VA pension benefit, which that's something else that we will probably talk about in a future discussion with David, because that's a big part of what he does to help his clients, is working with veterans for the VA pension. But she came to us. Her husband's a veteran, and he had these great 5-year long-term care insurance policies, but they were at the tail end of it. He was getting home care that was costing roughly $9,500 a month at that point. And this is going back several years. And I was like, well, why does it cost that much for home care? It's because he was a really big guy. It was a type of dementia issues. And the only way he could be, quote, controlled if he got frustrated is if there were 2 very large male home health aides. That's the only way he could be calmed down, is if 2 of them were there. If one of them was there, it could end up being a fight. So this is why it was costing so much. And look, the long-term care insurance was paying for all of it. No issue. So she came to us. It's like, okay, well, we can go ahead and get you qualified for that VA pension benefit pretty quickly, but we got to set up the trust. We got to run through this process. We got to move these assets into the trust and just go from there. And this was right back when the VA didn't have a look-back period. We're going to talk about the Medicaid look-back period soon, but the VA didn't have a 3-year look-back period at that point. So we lay out the plan. Here's the documents. The step is to go run through the documents, sign them, make sure they're complete, then start moving and transferring assets. She goes to the banker and she goes to the financial advisor, who know nothing about Medicaid planning. Part of the plan was, okay, you need to liquidate these CDs because you need to move them into the irrevocable trust. If they'll move them without, just retitle them without taking them and liquidating them, fine. But the bank said, no, they have to be liquidated. They're like, don't liquidate those CDs. You're going to lose $3,000 of your accumulated interest. Don't do that. That's a horrible decision. How dare the attorney, the Medicaid planners, suggest that? Because it was $9,500 a month that she was paying out. Goes to the financial advisor. He wants you to take this and move it into this trust. Well, I can make you more money in the market. And blah, blah, blah. Just like totally, just totally crapping on everything. Don't move it into this trust. He's just trying to take your money and move it somewhere else. Okay, so we were at the point, look, you need to sign the documents and we need to move this, because the VA was changing their rules and they were going to put in that 3-year look back period. It's like, you got to get this in within the next month because they're changing the rules. It's going to be 3 years. And I think at that point it was about $2,200 or maybe even $2,300 a month from the VA that was getting passed up. I'm not signing anything until you tell me what it's going to be invested in and that you can get more money than my financial advisor. And why should I give up these CDs that have accumulated all this interest? Why shouldn't I just wait 6 months? Because in 6 months, that's 6 months times $2,200 a month that you're giving up. And more than that, 3 years, that's almost $80,000 that you're giving up because your banker doesn't want you to lose $3,000. And your financial guy isn't thinking about, okay, this is going to be a cost of $9,500 a month that's coming out. It's like, I can do better in the market than putting it into something that's safe and secure. So she ended up blowing that deadline, said, forget it. My other professionals just made me feel so nervous about this that I'm not going to do it. And then you remember she had the nerve to say, well, since I'm not doing this, even though you've done all the work, can I get some of my money back? No, no. So these other professionals who didn't know what they were talking about really messed up and interfered in the whole plan.
Well, the fact of the matter is, in the real world, nothing wrong with that. Everyone's got their own agenda. The
Hmm.
for better or for worse, the financial advisor uh, wants to make sure you maximize your investment, that you don't lose anything, you don't, whatever the
Hmm.
risk factors and all that. The estate attorney wants to make sure probate rolls freely and family objectives are met. The tax
Hmm.
advisor wants to say, oh well, I made sure you didn't pay more taxes than you needed to, and those agendas may be contrary to a much bigger goal. I think of the great example is, yeah, okay, it's going to cost you. You're going to lose not any principal. Not going to lose any of your principal, but some accumulated interest that you could have got had you kept those CDs. Yeah, you'll
Hmm.
lose a few thousand, but in the face of losing several thousand a month in benefit for this benefit we were pursuing and future benefits, you're gonna give up that money. But the the other advisors don't aren't aware of the benefit, don't
Hmm.
understand that, and don't see, maybe they'll call it the big picture. Um, so yeah, beware of hidden agendas. Understand
Yeah.
the big picture, and trust an advisor, and you have to do your due diligence and understand all that, and then make your own decision, in spite of somebody saying, "Well, you're going to lose some." Well, quite frankly, back of that agenda may be the fact, oh no, if you cash that asset in, if I lose that IRA, yes, there may be some tax, but you know what? That advisor, loses the ability to earn their investment fee.
Yeah.
It sounds like, well, why would, they're not supposed to be that. They're supposed to be watching out after me. Well, be careful of hidden agendas and look at the big
Yeah.
picture.
Now, I that was one example where there were actually two professionals on the case that were kicking and screaming and flummoxed the whole thing. I don't want people to think that's the impression that all other advisors will do that. Well,
It's
they
it's
will have that self interest, but the second you say, look, this is part of Medicaid planning, most advisors will either go, all right, let me look into it, or, okay, if you're with a professional who understands Medicaid planning, all right, we're going to follow that lead. And that's fine. The one thing that I've found that really kind of, if there's some initial questioning, it's like, okay, look, if you think you can make more money in the market for our clients, great. You have to start with 120,000 as the base and still make more money. Well, I can't guarantee that. Well, when we're looking at these are numbers from the Genworth study. It's getting close. Like in 5 years' time, a private room at a nursing home is going to be about $10,000 per month. So over 12 months, that's 120,000. If you can make 120,000 and more
A month.
than them transferring the 120,000 a year,
Mm-hmm.
10,000 a month,
Mm-hmm.
then okay, let's show me the numbers. Most of them go, well, I can't guarantee that, or well, wait a minute, that's way no, that's way more than what we're looking at getting. Well, okay, they're not looking at that expense, and it is a pretty big expense. All right. So, okay, we've talked a bit about the problem. Now let's talk about the actual tests for Medicaid. And there are
Requirements. What are the requirements?
requirements.
Yeah.
Right. So these requirements, the way to look at it is, okay, Medicaid is long-term care insurance, but you have a copay and a deductible. Okay. Well, first, to even qualify, there's the age requirement, although there are a lot of exceptions. Okay, 65 plus. Okay, that's just, you're either 65 plus or you're not. Or again, there are certain medical conditions and things that allow you into anyway. That's one test. That's the simplest. There's also the medical need. Okay, so for a medical need, in order to qualify for that skilled nursing care level of care, it's 2 activities of daily living that you need assistance with. So with those activities of daily living, David, you are definitely more familiar with this than I am, only because you work a lot on the care end, and you've got professionals that you work with who live in that area. So I'll let you talk more about that type of need. And on my end, it's like talking about the asset test. I'll do more of that. So go ahead, tell us a little bit about the activities of daily living that people need.
Before I go to that, and I will address that, when we say Medicaid, there's probably really 5 different Medicaid programs. All those are different levels of care need within. For example, you could stay home, right? Most people do want to stay home, quite frankly. Then there's a independent living with on-site care. Then there's assisted living, licensed assisted living in a state. And then ultimately that highest level of care, which is a nursing home. And all of those are driven by looking at what you referenced, activities of ordinary daily living, ADLs for short. To be qualified for that highest level of Medicaid called a nursing home, but Medicaid can also cover assisted living and home health care. But to be in a nursing home requires that you need just about some help with most all at core activities of daily living, and I'm choosing my words specifically, and that's important. Definitions are important, but we're looking at things like bathing, dressing, toileting, medication management, transferring, being a fall risk, hygiene reminders. You don't necessarily have to be a complete and total invalid, bedridden, but you do need to have, as you said, at least for a nursing home, probably 3 of those. For assisted living, 2 of those. For home health care, depending on the state and the rules, 2 or 3. But we don't make the rules, but the fact of the matter is every state does have these general tests. So you're going to want to know early on when you're talking about Medicaid, a professional assessment of what are the level of care needs, because every state is going to require that the physician provide a survey of what's needed. They usually have their own, each state has its own independent organization that oversees that. So we're not placing people in a nursing home that don't need to be there. But I think we'll understand if we're talking about that highest level of care, that $10,000 a month cost or more in some states, you are probably bedridden on a walker, a wheelchair, and you really do need someone there all the time, making sure you haven't fallen and I can't get up. Have you taken your medicine? Let me help you get dressed, all of those things. So if that level of care is there and it's confirmed by the doctor and the physician, then you've met that requirement. So what did you say early on? You've reached the age limit. Now you have, I've got some 95-year-olds that are out in the golf course, but no. You've aged out, and by gosh, you begin to need this level of care. So that would be the second fundamental requirement.
Okay. The other one, which may or may not be a big issue, is income. So that's the third requirement. It's what's your level of income? And this is where the states can have different levels of requirements. And like you said, different programs, the income might be a critical requirement, and in other cases, not. So on the income end, I'll let you go ahead and talk a little bit about the income, because really this is Medicaid Planning 101.
Right.
And you have these different stages of potential care, and there are different programs of Medicaid that can help with different things. So tell us a little bit about the income requirements that you've seen.
So again, are we talking, and I'll answer my own question in a moment, are we talking about Medicaid for assisted living, that nice place, quite frankly, that you'd love to take grandma to, that's got a chandelier, a grand piano, bingo night, movie night, a dining room, some activities that, a bus. If it's assisted living, that's a different set of rules, because let's use the right jargon. that Medicaid program is called a Medicaid waiver program. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to, no, grandpa's had a stroke, a setback, he's in the hospital, he's gone to rehab, he is not coming back home. And he needs that
Yeah.
high level of care called a nursing home. I would say this, that place that nobody wakes up and wants to go there. But the day comes, if you don't die, you have this setback, unfortunately, and now it's not possible for you to stay at home. Or, well, by the way, this is another tricky thing, Jeff. An assisted living can look like a duck, walk like a duck, sound like a duck, but it's not a nursing home. So,
Yeah.
oh yeah, bring grandma here. We'll have somebody on staff. We'll do this. We'll do that. Oh, we'll be there, take care of her. Oh yeah, the cost is 10, 12,000 a month, but it's not a nursing home.
Yeah.
Therefore, you don't qualify in a particular state for that Medicaid waiver program for assisted living. So you better move her to that nursing home. Oh, I don't want to. I promised Grandpa I'd never take Grandma to a nursing home. Well, wait a minute. It's quite possible to get a nursing home that is, it will be acceptable. But that's facility search, another subject. But
Mm-hmm.
all right, so we've got the older person, the senior who needs that level of care. We've got the proper facility, which is the nursing home. How do I get Medicaid to pay the bill? Well, income is pretty black and white, the federal requirement. Generally about $2,300 a month for a single person. But, so, oh no, grandma has a Social Security check and two small pensions. She's got $3,000 a month. You mean she doesn't qualify? I hear that all the time. She makes
Mm-hmm.
too much. I was told she makes too much money. She doesn't qualify. No, no, no. The rules of the game say fundamentally that if your cost of care, which is going to range from 6 to 10 to 12,000 a month, exceeds your income. This is for federal Medicaid for a nursing home. Then income's
Mm-hmm.
not an issue, but it is an
Right.
issue for assisted living. In assisted living, the rules are much tighter. But I think the purpose of this conversation is nursing home, right? So,
Yeah.
so for nursing home, again, we could have a separate discussion about assisted living waiver programs. But for the nursing home, don't be so concerned about, don't let anybody tell you that because grandma makes $4,000 a month, she does not qualify for a nursing home Medicaid. Because the basic rule is if the cost of her care exceeds her income, she's met the income requirement through some other provisions that you can have.
Mm-hmm.
So, except that if her income exceeds the average monthly cost of a nursing home in your state, and that's published, and each state publishes that. Now, while you're the nursing home you're talking to want $9,000 a month, the average cost might be $7,500 around the state.
Right.
So that average cost, if your income exceeds the average cost, you will not qualify. So you got to be careful of that too. But not a lot of people we talk to have income of that level unless you had a strong Social Security, a federal retirement, and some other job that all adds up to that.
Mm-hmm.
So don't let income stand in the way of qualifying for a nursing home. Maybe an issue on assisted living or home health care, but not a nursing home.
Right. And another piece of that too is there was that Miller case that came out where it became a kind of 14th Amendment equal protection clause. Well, wait a minute, you can't discriminate on rights and privileges and programs among different citizens and whatnot. It's okay, there's a lot of technical stuff behind it. But basically that resulted in a case where if a state says, oh, your income is at this level, then there's a workaround. So that if the income goes into a Miller Trust and then goes immediately back out to the nursing home, it's kind of treated like an asset that gets spent down every month. And okay, it works. When we get to the toolbox, we'll talk a little bit about that particular type of trust. Even though North Carolina isn't one of those states that looks at that income, we're still including this trust because I don't trust the legislature not to just do something crazy and turn us into an income state. And I don't want to have to go to court to get one judicially put together as part of this process. So that trust is kind of there as part of the toolbox. We'll get to that. But that's income is that third big requirement. The fourth one, and this is the one that's the most difficult for people to pass because they've accumulated assets through a lifetime of work and they don't want to just give it all up or spend it all below a certain level so that you end up with less than $2,000. It's like, I worked my whole life and I got to have this all go to the nursing home. Well, wait a minute. This is exactly what the Medicaid program was designed to prevent so that you don't lose everything, right? So the asset test, you're allowed to keep certain assets and still qualify for Medicaid. Now, that's just the qualification. We'll talk as part of this discussion a little bit about, quote, Medicaid recovery. If you're an individual, you're allowed to keep up to $2,000 in liquid assets. So most of my clients, it's just in a checking account. You're allowed to have a primary residence, and in North Carolina, the equity limit on that house is $713,000 in 2024. So that's one of those numbers that may go up or maybe down over time, depending on what's going on. So yeah, you can have your primary residence and you get to keep a vehicle, right? Talking about those myths that are out there. Oh, I was told I can keep the house and qualify for Medicaid. It's no problem. And then my kids get the house. Well, yeah, if you own that house solely in your name, Medicaid can put a lien against the house. So after you're gone, the kids can't get the house, sell it, and then get all the money from it. Medicaid gets paid back. So anyway, those are the asset tests, the limits that you're allowed to keep. But part of what we do as certified Medicaid planners is look at not just the value of the asset, the characterization of the asset, and then also what can we do to change or transform that characterization within the rules so that you and the family get to keep more. So just as an example with that house, it's like, okay, you have that solely in your name. Medicaid can put a lien against it. You're still going to qualify for Medicaid. Well, what if you were to give that house away more than 5 years? Right, that's transforming it. What if you've got the house, it's worth $700,000, but your equity is only $500,000. You've got $200,000 in a mortgage or a line of credit that needs to get paid back. Medicaid doesn't care about your debts. They only care about your assets. So if you've got $202,000 in this checking account, well, okay, if you just pay off the mortgage, you're qualifying for the liquid asset test and the house test. If you just said, oh, well, I want to keep the mortgage because it's a low interest rate and I'm going to spend all this other money down, well, the debt's still going to be there. So it's making these kind of chess moves that really help save the money for the family if you do it the right way.
Broadly, Jeff, what we're talking about is the character of an asset, and that would be such terms as countable, non-countable, recoverable, unavailable. The character, so there's the asset, then there's the character of the asset, and then there are those changes, recharacterization of those assets that can make it unavailable or non-countable, non-recoverable, and therefore be able to say, oh, okay, someone tells you, no, you're not qualified because you've got this much money. Well, how about if we do this or do that? And also looking to the future, now magically you've met the limit and you've met that last requirement. I think a great example, oh, that's gaming the system. You're bending the rules. You're taking unfair advantage. Hold on. I don't know if you mentioned this, or I think you've used it before. a statement by one of the Supreme Court justices, Brandeis, I think his name was,
Hmm.
where he tells the story about in Washington D.C. You can go to work going through a toll bridge and paying your $5 fee or whatever it was, or you can choose to take a different route, go around. Might take you a little bit longer, but there's no cost. It's the free bridge. And he
Hmm.
said, what's wrong with somebody taking a deduction or making a choice to do this rather than that in order to have this benefit? There's nothing wrong with that. And in fact,
Right.
yeah, so I think it's a great example. I'm not perhaps giving it the way that he did it, but the point is by using the rules and going to hopefully someone that knows what they're doing and can the consequences of those changes, you can then qualify for this massive benefit that you paid for. Why not?
Hmm. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's all of Medicaid planning. It's making sure that you use whatever the rules are to the best advantage for you and your situation and still get the care that you were promised.
But it's not the job of the Medicaid caseworker to tell you what the rules
Oh,
are. It's not.
no.
They are not your advocate, and quite frankly, neither is your financial advisor. He's not going to be there to be your advocate for. He's your advocate to make the most money you can on your dollar, not to
Hmm.
qualify for the benefits you've earned. So make sure you're talking to someone who's advocating for you to to receive the benefits
Yeah.
that again you've earned. Yeah.
Oh, and this is something that, thank you for bringing this up. You're right. The Medicaid caseworker is not your friend. And in fact,
Right.
they may
Right.
even be your enemy.
Yeah.
And this
Yeah.
is a case
Yeah.
where there was a husband and son. Mom was the one who needed Medicaid. And they came into the office. What can we do? And I said, well, okay, I can see that there's a plan here. But look, it's just about shifting a little bit of money. I don't think we necessarily need to set up trusts or any of that stuff. And I gave them your name and information. I said, I think this is much more on the application end and there's a couple of small moves. And I already talked with them. Look, just you don't need to pay me. Just go ahead and go over with David and pay him. He'll take care of it. I hear back from them about 14, 15 months later. And they said, well, no, we didn't go with him. I just need a very specific question because we went down to the Medicaid office and we talked with the caseworker and she gave us a Medicaid plan. Okay, what did they tell you to do? Well, mom had an IRA. They didn't want to take money out of mom's IRA, even though she was the one who needed care. She had a bunch of medical bills, so they spent dad's money down on the medical bills. It still wasn't enough. The caseworker said, well, go ahead and take money out of the line of credit for the house to pay those medical bills. And then they said, well, okay, now you just need an immediate annuity. Go get an immediate annuity for mom to spend her money down. And what the caseworker didn't say is that's mom's income. That goes to the facility first. So it wasn't even that they basically said, spend all your money down. They put them tens of $1,000s in debt that wasn't needed because that's what the caseworker said. Here's your Medicaid plan. So look, if however long this Medicaid 101 is, just realize the Medicaid caseworker is not your friend. They're not going to give you a plan that's to you and your family's advantage. Don't do it. Don't go to the Medicaid
Yeah.
office for answers because what they're going to tell you is how you should be spending all of your money down before the government kicks in the
Yeah.
benefits that you were promised.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
laughing, Jeff, because it reminds me. I'm a pilot and fly more in my younger days, but I've got a poster on my wall that says the 10 biggest aviation lies, and the very first one, if you made a wrong turn on the taxiway and the FAA guy shows up, the top one is the FAA is the lie that I'm with the FAA. I'm here to help you. Whoa, no, that's not why they're there. And it's not, I'm not a big conspiracy. I'm not going to say this is a
Yeah.
conspiracy, but I, the reality is that, remember we early on said everyone's got their own agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the facilities that you're talking to when you're talking about mom going into a facility, their agenda is to make they God love them, it's a business. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
They need
Yeah.
to pay their salaries, they need to have money to take care of it. But if you do a little online research about the business end of a nursing home, again, the average executive director is 225,000 a year. A lot of these nursing homes are not your local mom and pop deals that were started years ago. They've been bought out by the big chains,
Mm-hmm.
the big corporations that own these. And you do a little public research there, not a bad business.
Mm-hmm.
The presidents of those organizations, 10 million a year plus $1 million bonuses. God love them. That's that's they need to make money, right?
Yeah.
But understand this: if you walk in the door and grandma does end up on Medicaid as a result of you doing the work to get it done, Medicaid only pays about, I don't know if I'm correct on this, I think the figure, Jeff, is about 85%, 80% of what private pay is. So they're not
Yeah.
going to make their bonus and their whatever they need to make. And again, they need to pay the bills,
Right.
but they're not going to do that if everybody and their brother in that facility is on Medicaid. So they're not
Yeah.
anxious to tell you, what do I do with grandma's pile of cash? Well, you give it to us. They're not going to say it like that, but
Yeah.
you've got to spend down and then we can put you on Medicaid. No, no, no. By the
Mm-hmm.
way, there's a lot of things you can do to preserve that money that you'll talk about, but you're
Mm-hmm.
not going to hear that from they're not, they're not your friend. That they don't
No.
represent you. They represent their company, and that's what they should do.
Yeah.
The, the caseworker, quite frankly, has a much stronger, closer relationship with those facilities and the business office of those facilities than with you and the public
Mm-hmm.
because they're dealing with them every day. And so I don't know. Again, not a conspiracy, not it's just the way it is. Realize who has the agenda, get the facts, and make the best decision is an informed decision.
Yes. Absolutely. All right. So before we get into any of these specific techniques, there are some very specific rules that we need to take a look at. These are the big ones. And just to make sure, look, if you want to follow up with this, I think this is going to be a good resource. But there is a free online course that I've got set up at freemedicaidcourse.com. Again, that's freemedicaidcourse.com, where it has my book, The Long-Term Care Solution, previously called Don't Go Broke. And it runs through a lot of these things in a little more detail than what we can put together here. But here is the big asset thing that you have to realize that most people just don't understand or they don't quite get it. There is a huge difference between gifting and transforming, or like you said, recharacterizing assets. If you were to say, oh, well, I've got $1 million too much, I'm just going to give $1 million to my son. Okay, that's a gift. Anything within the last 5 years for Medicaid, and we'll talk more about the 5-year rule, that's considered a gift. However, if what you did instead was, look, I've got $1 million too much. I know I'm going to be going to the nursing home within the next 6 months. I'm going to fly out to Las Vegas and I'm going to put $1 million bet down on the roulette wheel. If it's on, I'm going to bet on red. If it comes up black, okay, I've lost my money. But if it comes up red, okay, I'm going to make enough money that I can pay for my own care. All right, it comes up the wrong way, you lose your money. That's not a gift. That's not something that Medicaid can say legitimately, oh, you hid this money. Let's just say you've got the footage at the casino, you made, you got the $1 million, you put the bet down and you can prove, I spent it. I'm legally allowed to do this. That's not a gift. So if you start with that understanding, you can start to realize that you can make a lot of legal and legitimate transactions without it being considered a gift. Taking $200,000 out of your checking account to pay off the remainder of the mortgage is not something that's going to be part of that 5-year look back period, because you're just recharacterizing it and changing it from a liquid asset to going into the home, which you're allowed to do. So that's my kind of example to get people to realize not everything you do within the last 5 years is considered something that Medicaid's not going to be okay with.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, but I think the approach to the spending of the assets, excuse me, is, did that transaction, did that recharacterization benefit the claimant, grandma? Was it a benefit to the claimant? If it was a benefit to her, then that is not a gift. In my own father's situation, he made it to 99 and a half. The last 5 years, he was in good shape, and he would, the subject of his money came up, it would, well, son, don't worry, that's your money. That generation wants to leave something behind, right? And I go, Dad, I don't need your money. We talked about the fact that the best thing to leave behind in his particular case was not the money, it was memories and values. So we didn't go to an Indian casino and lose $10,000 in a weekend of fun. But if we had done so, that would have been his choice for entertainment. But we did take a cruise to Alaska. We took a cruise up to Mississippi. We went down to Disneyland with the kids to Florida. We flew over to Japan to see my son get married. All of that, and we served as his companion. All of that was for his benefit. And what great memories were created, and those were not penalized, because they all served, and a whole lot of other very interesting examples that you'll give, I think, they benefited grandma or grandpa and were not going to be considered a gift or otherwise be penalized.
Correct. And now I think that's a really good lead in to talk about that 5-year rule and how that works. It's like, okay, 5 years from the date you make that Medicaid application, Medicaid goes back and looks through all the finances and any gifts that you've made. Again, not something that you paid for that you benefited from, but it was a gift. Now, using your example, if your father paid for all of that cruise and everything else and didn't go,
that's a little different.
That's a gift. But that one little difference, it was to benefit him and, like you said, make memories. So it's that gift within the last 5 years. So part of what a lot of people don't realize when they're signing the Medicaid application itself, that actual application isn't terribly complicated on its face. It's all the supporting documentation and everything else that you got to make sure is absolutely correct in seeing what's going on. And this is one of the things that David and his team does when we're doing the actual Medicaid applications for our clients. He's handling that end of the things. They will look through all the 5 years of bank statements. And I said, well, that's not right. That's private information. But no, when you sign that application, you are releasing that right to privacy as part of your process. Okay, I'm applying for this, where Medicaid could be paying that nursing home bill, that very expensive nursing home bill. You're giving them that permission to go through all of that. So when they look through the last 5 years to see, hey, wait a minute, there was this money that was pulled out that was irregular. What did you do with it? And they may need you to justify it. Giving another story, we went through this process with some clients. They did have a decent amount in significant assets, but they also had a lot of real estate. And it really was to the family's advantage if they were to take that real estate, put it into an irrevocable property trust, which we'll talk about in a bit, get the 5-year clock started on that, and then move the rest of the money that they needed above a kind of a cushion. And they had sufficient income to take care of their needs each month, but they were going to take that money and go ahead and put it into the irrevocable family trust to get the 5-year clock going. All right, what's going on in that last 5 years? So They did that, or so we thought. And then the daughter, who was the trustee, went over to visit mom and dad. And she called me that next Monday. She said, Jeff, I was at my parents' house, and I'm finding $100 bills stuffed into cereal boxes within the pages of books on the bookshelf, stuff, a wad of cash in the free. It's like they ended up going to the bank before signing their documents and said, oh, I'm just going to take out $100,000 and I'm going to hide this money in my house. Look, Medicaid is going to know. Don't ever think that you can just go and take a bunch of money out, bury it in the coffee can in the backyard. Medicaid will never know. No, look, they're going to know. And the other piece of that is if you're signing that application or someone else is signing that application, they are doing it under penalties of perjury. That is Medicaid fraud. And you will get prosecuted and potentially go to jail if you lose that case. So don't mess around with it, especially because there are so many legal ways to recharacterize assets and move money around. Don't try to hide anything.
Yeah. And in the last couple of years, the Medicaid counties, the state, it's not the FBI or the CIA or the NSA, but I will tell you something. They've got systems that they're now subscribing to that give them access. Once you sign that release you're talking about, they then get access into your banking records and your financial records and your real estate records. Believe me, there are no secrets. You better be transparent in disclosing and better have done it right, because they will know and will see that, and you'll be asked to. You better be able to justify those transactions that will show up.
Right. And now, again, we're talking about the 5-year rule. It's the 5 years from the date of application. And this is something that's in my book, which is part of the free MedicaidCourse.com. A do-it-yourselfer. He thought he knew everything. Had mom, 2 sisters. It was getting mom's asset levels down so that he knew when she got to that 5-year mark, it's going to be fine. Well, he messed up also that, we'll move all these assets now to me and my sisters. And then annually she can give, I think at that time it was like $11,000 or $12,000 gifts each year, and they don't count. No, they don't count for filing out a gift tax form with the IRS. They do count for Medicaid. So he had it all planned down to the penny. And then he said, well, it takes Medicaid 2 months to process an application. So 4 years and 10 months after mom gave those big amounts to him and his sisters, we'll file the application. And then by the time the 2 months are up, the 5 years is up. No, all of that money was counted as a gift because it was within the 5 years of filing that application. And so they came back with this penalty period, and this is another rule. The penalty period, and the state sets the amount within parameters. The one that I use is $6,500 a month, just because I know that one, but I think it's probably more at this point. So if you gave $65,000, you're ineligible for 10 months. With the large amount that was gifted within that last 5 years, they were ineligible for almost 7.5 years. That penalty period can actually be longer than that 5-year look-back period. So just by filing that application 2 months too soon, there was a ton of ineligibility. Mom still wouldn't have qualified because of those other gifts. He mistaken on that particular rule. But that's what the 5-year look back is from the date of application. It's a small technical thing in your mind, but it's a huge deal to Medicaid. That's for sure.
Yeah, there's so many arcane, complex rules. Cross the T, dot the I. Well, wait a minute. I can do a promissory note. Oh yeah, but there's 5 or 6 different absolute requirements. What was that one case we had where, I don't know, they forgot to have the requirement son. They called the son up, and the son,
Oh,
instead of saying, "You need to talk to my attorney," "Oh, I'll give you the answer." Too late.
well,
Now
oh
you,
yeah.
yeah, what, yeah,
Actually,
yeah, you
if
remember that one.
I remember this particular case, it was, yeah, dad was the one who needed Medicaid.
Hmm.
Part of it was, okay, there was too much in assets for mom. You had that promissory note that was down cold. The sum of money got paid to the son, and then the son was going to pay the mom back over time starting at a certain date. He called the Medicaid office. It wasn't that the caseworker called him, because they knew there was an attorney involved, they wouldn't call. But he, as the son and the trustee, he called in, "What's taking so long?" And so the caseworker's like, "Oh, well, look, we're processing it. Well, while I've got you on the phone, let me ask you a couple of questions." And went through, why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? And then they get to the promissory note. "Oh, so why did you need this loan for this money? Why did mom
Yeah,
give you this money in exchange for this?" And he said, "To qualify for Medicaid."
right. That's one of the absolute prohibitions. You can't. The reason cannot be specifically that. So,
Yeah,
duh.
but that's what he said, and it it flummoxed the whole thing. I'm trying to use a nice word because this is going to be on YouTube. It flummoxed the whole thing. It just all fell apart because of that one small mistake, but it was a big one. So yeah, that was a very important requirement in that promissory note, that they messed up by not doing what they said they would do, which is not communicate with any agencies, talk with us specifically. But he just called up and went right ahead, and I know what I'm doing. But, okay. Right. So I don't want to get too far off because we've still got a good amount to cover, and we're already getting close to an hour of really good information here. So there's income states, and we talked a little bit about that. I don't think we need to cover too much in that area. If a state says, okay, here's your income limit for that skilled nursing level for nursing home care, it's a rule that's on the books. Well, if it goes to a special needs Miller Trust and comes out, and some states they kind of acknowledge this, and they just, well, okay, we're gonna not really look at it because we know that there's this solution there. But income for that top level doesn't really matter. Check with a certified Medicaid planner or a Medicaid planning attorney in your specific state if you've got questions on that. But the part of the deal with Medicaid is the person who's getting care, all of their income, minus a certain personal needs allowance, has to go to the facility first, and then Medicaid pays the difference at Medicaid's rate. So when we first started talking about this, I said, yeah, there's deductibles and copays. Well, the asset test and getting below whatever those limits, that's your deductible. Your copay is all of your income minus that personal needs allowance has to go to the facility first. And then the insurance company, meaning the Medicaid program with the U.S. government, picks up the difference for that care. So that's how your income is working. If you're talking about a spouse, their income doesn't count towards that care. It's going to, again, your income goes to the facility, your spouse's income, that's their own. Anything you want to
By the
talk
way,
about with that?
yeah, yeah. So, income. What income are we talking about? I like the expression "name on check rule," meaning that when what income are we talking about? The claimant, the person that is going to be using Medicaid going into the facility, it's the income that comes in every month from well, good example, Social Security, a retirement check, a rental income, any regular income check that comes in that person's name is what we're dealing with. If the check is coming to the spouse from her Social Security, from her retirement, it is non-countable and cannot be touched or considered by Medicaid, except in a later calculation regarding what's called the minimum monthly spousal needs allowance. Because while it's correct to say that that income that's coming into the claimant is going to be turned over to the nursing home. There's another rule that's subsequent to that will ask the question, well, how much is left over for mom living in the community and
Mm-hmm.
at home? How much is left for her? And the state wants to make sure that mom, the spouse, who's ever at home, has a minimum monthly amount of money coming in to be
Mm-hmm.
able to maintain her lifestyle. It's complex minimum monthly spousal needs allowance. And so
Yeah.
if in fact
Yeah.
mom only has a very small social security check, all of dad's checks are going to the nursing home, that doesn't leave mom much money. So there's another
Yeah.
calculation that can be done. So don't
Yeah.
worry about as long as we got that, because we can go to the minimum monthly spousal needs allowance.
That's a very good point. And the way to really think about, well, why did they do that? Look, Medicaid has its budget. And if you meet those qualifications requirements, all right, the money will pay there. What they don't want is another government agency to have somebody else having to get on welfare just to
Mm-hmm.
get by because their spouse is getting care in the nurses.
Mm-hmm.
So there was that calculation. We don't want to completely impoverish the spouse if they don't have enough income because the person who needs the care is the one who happens to have the pensions and all the other stuff. So there is a way to get more income over to the spouse if they don't meet that minimum threshold. Very good point. All right, so let's now talk a little bit about the toolbox. And again, I'm going to push you over to the freemedicaidcourse.com because that's a big part of my book, the long-term care solution that's in there. It's both in a digital PDF format as well as an audio book. And I think we even kind of put it into a video with captions and some nice calming drone footage, going over some nice areas or water or whatever with the audio book. So you got 3 different formats and it goes through it. A big part of that is talking about the toolbox. So what are the kind of main documents that you may, not necessarily have to, may need in your particular case for a Medicaid plan? So this is something that David and I have kind of called the 2 trust solution. Even though it's more than 2 trusts, these are the main ones. There's the irrevocable property trust and the irrevocable family trust. If this is the simplest Medicaid plan, where you have more than 5 years before you're going to need care, you take any real estate that you want off the books for Medicaid, it goes into the irrevocable property trust. Anything else goes into the irrevocable family trust. And then you start the 5-year clock. So 5 years and 1 month later, you apply to Medicaid. Hey, all of that stuff doesn't count because it was more than 5 years ago. Great. So what exactly has to happen in these trusts? Because I do have a lot of clients who have revocable living trusts. They use it for avoiding probate. That's estate planning. That's a whole other thing. That's freetrustcourse.com if you're just looking at estate planning. But for Medicaid purposes, with the estate or revocable living trust, they remain the trustor, the trustee, and they remain the beneficiary. So they're administering it for their benefit. So when I'm talking about this type of planning with my current estate clients, they go, oh, this is great. This is wonderful. Let's go ahead and put these irrevocable trusts together. Well, wait a minute. You can't be the trustee of your own trusts here. You have to have somebody in charge now. So essentially, if you're ready to take the bulk of your assets, almost all of it, move the money into the family trust, move the property to the property trust, and put someone else, usually one of the kids, put them in charge to the point where if you said, son or daughter, I need $10,000, can you pull it out of the trust for me? They get to say no, and there isn't anything legally you can do about it. Oh, wait a minute, I'm not so sure. Well, okay, this is one of those things. That's why there's this 5-year look back period. Medicaid doesn't want people just giving everything away in the next month applying for Medicaid. So it's that 5-year look back period. So when the assets go into the trust, you're no longer in charge of it. And in fact, for the irrevocable family trust, technically you're not even the beneficiary. The way we get around this is that trust is structured with two phases. One is while you're alive, or if it's a couple, at least one of you is alive. And then after death, this is the distribution phase where it goes out as part of your estate. Here's where I want this to go and how this goes. But during that first phase, the beneficiary is that trustee so that they can move money out into a separate account in their name, and then they can turn around and pay you money or pay for things for you. So you have to really, really, really trust that they're going to do essentially what you want them to do, to the point where, yeah, you can't demand the money. Now, how is that different from the irrevocable property trust? Well, for the property trust, you're putting that real estate into it, and you are retaining a few rights. You're retaining the right to live in the property. You're retaining the right to any income generated from the property. And usually this isn't rental properties that are going in here, because if you do take out any of that income and you need that care, that income has to go to that facility first. Remember that Medicaid deal with the income. So usually it's the family house, or maybe there's a vacation property. Okay, it's all going into the irrevocable property trust. Because you retain the right to live in the property and you retain the right to the income on the property and a couple other small things, when you pass on, your capital gains cost basis gets bumped up to the fair market value on the date of death. Okay, I don't want to get too deeply into that because it is in the book a little bit, in the free Medicaid course a little bit more. But dying while having enough rights in that property under the estate tax rules federally means if the kids turn around and sell the house immediately after you pass on, they're not going to have capital gains taxes. If instead it went to the family trust where you didn't retain any of those rights, it has your original cost basis. So if it's like one of these houses, yeah, mom or dad paid $100,000 for a house, it's now worth $700,000. They move it into the irrevocable family trust, and by the time they die, it's worth $1 million. That's $900,000 of taxable capital gains that the family's going to have to pay the taxes on. So that's why we use those two trusts. So those are the main ones in the two trust solution. What are some of the other trusts? Well, I already mentioned one. Each of a couple, or if it's just an individual, just them, gets this irrevocable, quote, special needs trust. Essentially, it's a Miller trust. So if you do have to filter that money through, it goes into the Miller trust, and then the money each month would go out to the facility. And it's in North Carolina, that's kind of there, like I said, just in case the legislature changes the rules. All right. And there's the irrevocable funeral trust. Now, I get a lot of questions on this one. Do we need to move money into it now? No. The funeral trust is taking advantage, potentially, of another Medicaid rule where you're allowed to leave up to or move up to $10,000 in order to take care of funeral and burial and other associated costs. There's a whole checklist of things that it can be spent on. That's there for any last minute spend out. So let's go ahead and give an example. The husband and wife, they've moved just about everything into these irrevocable trusts. They wanted to keep a little bit of a cushion. They kept like $20,000 in a checking account, and more or less the income that they were getting each year was also kind of what they were spending each month. So what's coming in is also going out. So it's about that $20,000 balance. And then, all right, let's just say they need care. They still got that $20,000. It's an individual. It's $20,000 too much. All right. We need to spend $18,000. Well, look, we can put up to the first $10,000 right into the funeral trust, and now we only have to find a way to spend $8,000. Believe me, David and I have seen enough cases where spending $8,000 to get you below that limit is not an issue. We can do that pretty easily. So you don't put it there to begin with. It's there in case you need it during that final spend down. Now, here's the deal with this trust that you also have to realize is if the money goes in there and you don't spend all of the money that you put in there, it has to go back to reimburse Medicaid. So that was part of the deal. You're going to allow to put it in there, but if it's not spent, Medicaid gets to reclaim that. So those are really the 4 trusts in the 4-trust solution. For an individual or the couple, it's 1 family trust, 1 property trust, and then each person gets the special needs mailer trust and each gets a funeral trust. Now, in addition to that, there's all the other documents that you kind of need anyway, but it should be coordinated with these trusts. So you need a pour-over will for the last will and testament so that if anything is in probate, it gets put over to the family trust, which is where all the estate stuff is. Each person should have their own durable general power of attorney and their health care power of attorney. They should have a living will, which is that in North Carolina, it's a declaration of a desire for a natural death. It's what my clients joke around and say is the pull the plug document. And a nomination of conservator in case somebody goes to court and they're saying, I want to become the guardian. Well, no, we've listed the same people you've got as your trustees to be the conservator of the estate. And your healthcare power of attorney agents are the same as your conservator of the person. So that's a whole toolbox. So when we're doing prospective planning, often we will put that whole toolbox into place, even if we're not necessarily at that point foreseeing using 1 or 2 or more of those trusts. For example, a couple of cases we've worked on, they've already sold the house. Mom and dad are kind of living in an apartment, but we still do the property trust in case an investment comes up. They can move money from the family trust to the property trust to buy that real estate, still get that capital gains bump up, and then eventually when they pass on, it goes over back to the family trust for distribution to the heirs.
I would interject.
The toolbox. Yeah, yes, please.
Yeah, I would interject. Do not go down the road of, oh, I don't need that. That doesn't apply to me, because the other promise is things never get better. They only get worse, and things change. Whatever it is today, if mom or dad does not die, they're going to get older. As they get older, it gets worse. Oh, you can tell story after story of things that change. Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad I did that. I'm glad we addressed that. Or no, we didn't address that, so now we have a problem because this was not set up. This planning, so to speak, over and above just I want to qualify for Medicaid. What about the family dynamics, the power of attorney, guardianship, heirlooms, all those things that are in your checklist, Jeff? I really appreciate that you dig very deeply to make sure these things don't become problems later. Make those decisions and understandings now, not when we're in that major crisis or when dad's dead. What did he want? I don't know. We didn't ask. So you better make some, including that funeral trust. Yeah, we may not pay for it now, but you ought to be talking to the funeral director to understand, did he want to be buried? Did he want cremation? Did he want, a golden casket or a wooden I don't know. I never discussed those terrible questions with mom or dad, because I didn't want to bring them up. Well, she's gone now, so let's get at least get an understanding now of what their wishes are. And, by the way, on the funeral trust, $10,000 limit, but correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, we could bury the kids and grandkids and build a big tomb, or, we could have one of these.
Well, it's state specific.
Okay.
Part of the expense can be burial plots for specific types of relatives. Now, I can't pull it right off the top of my head for North Carolina, and I think this is Texas, where the list of relatives that are allowed to have, you can pay for these burial plots as part of the spend down, even exceeding $10,000 to go into the funeral trust. It gets down to like step grandkids that you can buy plots for and all the other relatives in between. You don't get that with a lot of others. So there's a lot of more complex rules on what you can spend that money down on. But just going to where you're talking about that discussion. Part of what we do, and this is really more effective for the kind of prospective planning, they're putting stuff in for the 5-year clock to get started. The last tab in the big blue binder or the big green binder that we have for planning is end of life planning, where they can put in all of those things. So they don't even necessarily have to have the discussion with their trustee. The trustee just needs to know, when I go, make sure you're checking that tab. And they can go through all of that stuff with the funeral home. A lot of them will do kind of free pre-planning and give a printout of here's everything that you chose, and that can go right in that section. So that's a very good point.
I wanted to go back to your.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to your discussion of the administration of all those documents and trusts.
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing to have it set up and to agree this and this. It's another thing to have the follow through, which I appreciate your office does,
Yes.
to make sure that those transactions took. I can't tell you the number of cases that we run into. Oh, I did all that work. Oh, but you never moved the asset. You never followed the instructions. Amazing.
Yeah, this is an estate story, but okay, it was mom and the daughter. They did a revocable living trust because they wanted to avoid probate, and the daughter kept calling, and mom authorized me to talk with the daughter, and it's like, okay, the assets. I was like, okay, is everything in the trust like we talked about? And we laid out, here's everything that needs to, oh yeah, everything's in the trust. 6-7 months go by. And all of this was because the daughter was maybe, or then not, and then yes, probably, but going through a divorce. And every time, look, is everything in the trust? Oh yeah. Mom dies. And then she calls me and tells me, well, my, mom's stockbroker says that these assets have to go into probate and we need these forms. I'm like, oh, no. They're in the trust. And then she sends the paperwork and it never got into the trust. And so I said, look, you told me everything was in the trust. And she says, what do you mean by in the trust? Everything ended up going through probate because she didn't do that particular follow-up. Now, when it comes to Medicaid planning, we have to be more on top of it because it's not just, something ends up in probate and then goes to the trust later. It's you're not going to get your benefits if something pops up. This is also why you want to make sure you're telling the certified Medicaid planners about everything. You don't hide anything. You make sure that they know. I remember one case, and this is going back more than 10 years, maybe even close to 15, even before I was a certified Medicaid planner. Medicaid was being denied because they had too much real estate. What are you talking about? Turned out they forgot to tell me, and I think they legitimately did. There was about 1/10 of an acre lot that he inherited that was on the side of a mountain that was really just unbuildable on. So it was essentially worthless, but it was part of an inheritance that he got. And he owned it. And you're only allowed your, quote, primary residence and no other real estate. We ended up having to get a cousin who bought it for like $100, and we could show it really wasn't worth even the $100. And then the $100 got spent down. But it was one of these things where, look, if we knew about that, we could have taken care of it before we sent in the application. And I think it delayed it a month. So there was a month of private pay that they shouldn't have had to deal with if we had known everything and taken care of it ahead of time. All right. So yeah, we're getting pretty long. This is all good stuff, but I want to make sure that we talk about at least one creative thing. I think we already talked about that annuity case that we had. It wasn't really an annuity. It was a promissory note that would have worked. But the one case that I typically talk about, just because it kind of fit so well with explaining that there are lots of different rules that are out there. And I always have to start with the caveat, don't count on this working in your state. This works in North Carolina. It doesn't necessarily work in other states. Right. So I had two clients, husband and wife. It was her mother, and she was power of attorney for mom. So they gave me the outline. It's like, look, she has this really good pension. She's got the survivor's pension from the deceased husband, her father, and their Social Security. And right now, she is in a kind of memory care unit. She didn't really need help with those, like you said, those core activities of daily living because she could feed herself, dress herself, all that other stuff. Obviously, she, with such short-term memory issues, she needed someone to give her the medication that she needed on time and whatnot. But because of the strong pensions and Social Security and the cost of not needing that a higher level of actual care, they were paying about $6,000 a year out of her assets to make up the difference with the income. So it had in the checking account, and all this is rounded to make the numbers easy. She had about $340,000 in the checking account. And she also had a life insurance policy with a $60,000 cash value, but a $400,000 death benefit. It's like, that's the inheritance for the kids. All right. So Medicaid looks at that as, okay, that's $340,000 and $60,000. They only count the cash value. That's $400,000. If they had gone to the Medicaid office, they would have said, well, okay, spend $398,000 and then we'll talk. Well, okay, my clients came to me. We said, all right, but she doesn't have a primary residence. And then I asked them a question that they thought was kind of weird, but after explaining it, it worked. I said, is your house paid off and how much is that worth? I said, well, it's $500,000 and yeah, we paid it off this year. Okay. Mom's allowed to have a primary residence. She doesn't have to own all of it. So with $400,000, Mom could buy 80% of your home. And now it could be owned, again, North Carolina, 80% mom, 10% daughter, 10% son-in-law, all three of them on the deed as joint with the right of survivorship. And then when mom passes on, they get the house back. Well, wait a minute. Does that mean now that we're going to drain the cash value out of that life insurance policy as part of this transaction? We don't want to do that. There's a $400,000 death benefit. That's really supposed to be the inheritance for the kids. Okay. Son-in-law bought the policy in exchange for exactly the cash value rather than cashing it out. So that was an even transaction. Okay, so now the son-in-law has the policy and mom has exactly that $400,000 in cash. We executed a purchase agreement with the percentages, did the deed as all three with joint with the right of survivorship, made copies of the checks, whole transaction completely above board and even. And son-in-law and daughter, they get $400,000. Mom has a primary residence. All right. What do they do with the money? Well, they're looking at it. It's like, well, you sold 80% of the house. It's yours. But morally, as we look at this, that's mom's money. Morally, not actually, and not according to Medicaid. Daughter and son-in-law take the $400,000. They move it into the irrevocable family trust that lays out, here's the trustees, which lined up with the power of attorney, and here's where it could split 4 ways among the 4 kids when mom passes on. So all of that planning was done and mirrored her will, her wishes. And then the first transaction, the daughter takes $60,000 of that cash and buys the policy back from her husband and moves it into the trust. So within a couple of months, using these very specific rules, we filtered everything over to the irrevocable family trust. And there's no 5-year look back because mom wasn't the one putting the money into the trust. So that set everything up. There's no 5-year look back period. If she had applied for that Medicaid for that extra level of care in the next month, she would have met those asset requirements and it would have been fine. So that's just one way of knowing. That's one story in knowing that if you've got the right professionals who understand what they're doing, they can save a lot of money for the family completely legitimately, completely above board and within the rules, and in a way that's perfectly fine with Medicaid because they don't have any other choice. It's within the rules. So that's the story that I'm typically telling. All right. Anything you want to add before we close it out? It's a decent for a live stream. I've been entertained and listened to 3-hour live streams. I don't think we're going to go nearly that long for this one. But anything you want to add, David?
No, I know it's complex, but when I hear you tell the stories, it reinforces the fact there's a lot of tripwires, problems. You can make one mistake here and the brain surgery goes all wrong. So,
right.
Yeah, I would recommend you get advice from a professional. Don't try to do it yourself brain surgery, but it can be very successful if done right.
Okay. Yeah, so just to let everybody know, David and I are both certified Medicaid planners. We tend to work on a lot of cases together. It works well. As an attorney, I'm only licensed in North Carolina, but as a certified Medicaid planner, I can work throughout the country, except if you need an attorney, they need to be licensed in the state that these other legal documents and things like the toolbox being set up. However, there is a national document solution that we have access to so that I know it's going to be the same documents essentially with the state specific stuff that we can use in all 50 states. That's available as part of this, so we can work with an attorney in that state if that piece is needed, but we can essentially work nationwide, right, David? And
well,
you do.
What Jeff does not typically brag about is the fact that he actually teaches the estate and the Medicaid course and the VA course to that group of advisors. Yeah. So he's got a pretty strong network. When the time comes, what do we do in Missouri or whatever the state is, he has this network of people that he's familiar with and can get at to meet the need for legal documents.
Right. Okay. All right. So again, thank you very much for being on this live stream with us. We're going to, in just a second, we're going to kind of close this out, take a few seconds, and then we're going to come back for a live Q&A session as this is being broadcast on April 1st, 2024. Not a joke. It's not April Fool's Day. Not really. So we'll get back to you with that live Q&A in just a second. So if this is a replay for you, all right, let me just say what I always say to my clients. Please stay safe, plan ahead, and enjoy life. And whatever you do, make it a great day.
Okay. All right. So we're open for questions now. One of the things that I already put into the chat is there is about a 2.5 to 3 minute delay between what David and I are talking about right now and it actually showing up. So I asked if anybody go ahead and put some questions into the chat. I didn't see any specific ones at the moment. So please, if you do have questions, go ahead and put them in. Meanwhile, just for about 2 minutes to quote stall and let everything catch up. I just got to say, I'm really happy that the Durham Bulls home season starts tomorrow, which is kind of why we're going to be doing a lot of these live streams on Mondays because there's no AAA baseball on Mondays. I want to make sure I get as many of my Durham Bulls games in through April through September as possible. And so, David, do you have anything that you just want to kind of talk about before we get to any questions that might be out there?
How about those Wolfpack guys?
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, this area of North Carolina is an absolute hotbed of adversity around college basketball. There's Duke, Chapel Hill, NC State, and even to an extent, Wake Forest.
UNC, yeah, UNC.
Yeah, let me tell you, everybody hates the other school that they're not rooting for, and we are kind of in the midst of March Madness, and we've narrowed it down to the Final Four. And NC State beat Duke at basketball, and they're going to the Final Four. So I try to stay out of that a little bit. I try to go a little bit more towards, look, the Bulls are the home team. That's who I'm going to follow and go through and talk about.
Yeah.
But this is an area for college basketball unlike anything I've seen.
Yeah.
So yeah, big congratulations to NC State and on their victory and getting into the Final Four.
Yeah.
All right. So anything you want to add on the Medicaid end? I'm still not seeing any particular specific questions in the chat.
I think there's a lot of good content that we covered. I mean, really important stuff. Don't know how it would be condensed down, but I think it was covered very well, Jeff.
Well, okay. I think we both did a good job on that end. Again, just to make sure everybody's got the information, freemedicaidcourse.com. That's, again, it's free. Just go ahead, sign in, put in your email address. You can put in a password. You've got an account. This course is free. And then anytime you go to plainenglishattorney.com, you can just go into your library, and that course and the other courses you either purchase or get for free, you've got access to them at any point. So that's really that's all that information is free. Well, why do I put it out there as free? And it's because an educated client is one that's much easier to work with and who knows the value of what David and I are providing.
And the next step in that process, after you've learned the basics of brain surgery, is to fill out the questionnaire that's on the website, and then your team will set up a time for a no cost consultation to at least understand what's possible. It's pretty detailed, though. That questionnaire is pretty dark, but it needs to be that detailed and disclosing in order to be able to give recommendations and understanding.
Well, and not just the recommendations and understanding. If you are leaving stuff out on there, Medicaid will find it and see it, and they need that information as well. And we just kind of need to be prepared and understand what's going on. So yeah, the questionnaire is a little more extensive, but it is critical to making sure that we could save as much money for you as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. The Medicaid, what's very interesting is it's not the FBI or the CIA, but I will tell you what I've learned is that, especially in our local county, there's a new system that they've got access to that actually gets more information than you can imagine about your bank accounts and your financial transactions. So with us, be totally transparent and disclosing so we can give you options. Don't hold back and, well, I didn't want to tell you that. Well, you're not revealing that to Medicaid. Reveal it to us so we can tell you what the approach might be.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, you see any of those episodes of Law and Order where they forget to tell their defense attorney something and it pops up in court and it's like, yep, that's the nail in the coffin. Well, okay, it's not quite that dramatic with what we do, but those surprises really can hurt. Like I mentioned in live stream just now, having that real estate, that 1/10 of an acre on the side of a mountain that really wasn't worth anything, well, it's still real estate, and we would have been able to address it ahead of time if we had known about it. All right. So anything you want to add, David? Because I'm not seeing any specific questions here. I know that at some point people are going to be seeing this and they're going to be getting in touch with us for their personal questions for their particular situation.
Yeah.
So we've covered a lot of high level concepts here. Anything you want to add before we just kind of call it a good night?
No, I think from our experience, Jeff, this content will make your head swim. So
Yes.
people right now, I'm sure, are going, wow. But I think it'll, you fill out the questionnaire, then you'll have the opportunity to have I guess, a remote session or a personal session to get those
Mhm.
questions answered.
Okay. All right. Well, then I'll say it. I said it before. I'll say it again. Thank you for joining us and stay safe, plan ahead, and enjoy life. And whatever you do, make it a great day.
Go Wolfpack!